So today we're going to kick off the day with another really great session from our own Mr. Tim Hall, who also posted a super cute photo of Harper. We all love Harper the pup, and we miss her because we're not in the office anymore, and she used to come visit us all the time. But we'll start with Tim on a review of what was just released, as well as dive into the roadmap. So Tim, you want to get your presentation up? Awesome. And if anybody has any questions, please post those in the chat, the Q&A, or the Slack channel, and we'll pull them all together and share them with Tim.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I'm Tim Hall, the head of products here at InfluxData, and thank you for joining us today. I think yesterday's session, I heard from Paul about the vision of where we're headed from this point, and I'm here to fill in the details between now and then. So first thing, as we announced yesterday, InfluxDB 2.0 open source is now generally available. No, really, it is. The bits are posted and our docs are updated. You can go ahead and grab those today. Also, really appreciate all of the community feedback that we've got. There are more than 3,000 people that have downloaded and used everything from the initial alpha through all the beta releases and the release candidates. And I just want to emphasize how critical the community participation and feedback is in getting to this GA point. I know it may seem like a long time, and it took us a while to get here. But the feedback was critically important in understanding where we were getting things right and where we needed to improve. And particularly the biggest change that was made between the beta phase and getting to generally available was the focus on a drop-in replacement. And that was a big piece of feedback that we heard from so many of you. So yes, your feedback and participation absolutely matters. And I realize most people have day jobs. And maybe playing with alpha or beta software is not in your day job. So we really appreciate the extra effort that people put in to give us their feedback. And it really shows the care and passion that folks have for our technology. And again, we appreciate all of those contributions. Is it 100% defect free? No, of course not. It wouldn't be software if it was. So we'll continue to take that feedback, make incremental changes. I know somebody dropped something about backup today into a Slack channel, so we'll dive in and continue to work with you to improve. Now, today, just the Linux bits are available. And I know we've had a lot of questions about ARM and Windows and what's the process for folks using Docker to do the in-place upgrade. And so those things will be coming. If you're starting fresh, there is a Docker image that you'll be able to use. But if you are using Docker coming from 1.x, just hold off a little bit. There's lots of great and detailed instructions on the upgrade page, which describes the process and how to go about it. And as you read through that guidance, let that help you understand what needs to be done to move forward. But again, feedback welcome. Join us in the community and let us know how it goes. I think the thing that I've heard most from our enterprise customers, however, is that we've got a lot of emphasis on what's happening with InfluxDB 2.0 open source and our investments in the cloud, as Ryan sort of detailed over the last year or so of that being generally available. And so I really wanted to take a moment to talk about what we're doing for our commercial customers in the enterprise space. Because we have very specific plans. We have a team that's funded to focus on this area. And I think it's critically important to understand what this journey looks like, particularly now as Paul has laid out the vision for where we go from here. So on the enterprise front, one of the things that was introduced and may not be so subtle is that we included Flux as a side-by-side query engine in the InfluxDB enterprise release. And actually we introduced it starting with 1.7 as a technical preview, and we advanced that to Flux 0.65 in the 1.8 release. We've obviously advanced Flux since then, and so we'll talk about what we're going to do to advance it in an upcoming release of enterprise. But the point was, for those of you who had queries that went beyond the capabilities that InfluxQL could provide, and were staring at the face of a compiler or other scripting language in order to gain access to your data, we wanted to provide access to Flux to unlock those use cases for you. We also introduced the 2.0 read and write APIs to 1.8, so that for those of you who are getting started now on your enterprise journey, you could decide to use those read and write APIs to future-proof any applications that you're building on top of the platform, or take advantage of the new and supported client libraries across the 10 different languages that we currently support, and there's obviously some more coming, to sort of future-proof those builds. And so, again, with introduction of Flux, it's there in 1.8. You can begin to learn that, take advantage of that language, and obviously selectively maybe reduce external code that you've already written in preparation for an eventual InfluxDB Enterprise 2.0 edition. And obviously, those client libraries are available. They support read and write, and that also gets you prepared for what is next. Now, our dedicated team that's working on Enterprise is focused on our next release, which we're planning for the end of Q1 of 2021. So from a timing perspective, that's the expectation we want to set for the next set of the next feature-bearing release for Enterprise. One of the things that we're focused on, we've heard a lot of feedback from, is, hey, I'm running InfluxDB Enterprise as a service for many teams. And one of the challenges that I have is getting more granular metrics from an operational perspective to understand what each of those teams is doing, which includes things like understanding their growth of cardinality on a per measurement basis, size of data on disk, where they're pouring in values, and rates of change, because that may indicate a problem that team has introduced, obviously unwittingly, but that may need to be backed out. And so that's one of the big areas of focus, is to expand those operational metrics and give you greater visibility so you know which team is doing what, where within the instance. Second, for Flux, we'll advance to a more current version, and as well as delivering some additional performance improvements that Ryan talked about yesterday. There's the Flux pushdowns that are available, and we'll be exposing more operational controls in terms of memory, concurrency, and these are really similar to the query management controls that you have on the InfluxQL query engine as well. So if you've looked at those and played with those similar kinds of controls that we expose on the open source instance will be available to you in Enterprise for Flux as well. And then what may be a surprise to some folks, we have a stretch goal to work on one of the longest outstanding features, certainly from a sales perspective, that I've heard about, which is called intelligent rollups. So effectively, the way intelligent rollup should work is that we define a new retention policy that's associated with a raw set of data, and that it will automatically downsample those metrics on a per database basis. And not only that, but the query engine will then query beyond the supported data range without forcing you to change the retention policy. So effectively, you can think of this as the means for specifying the downsampling window that you want. All of the metrics will be downsampled within a particular database and targeted to a separate retention policy, which you can obviously change its duration. And if you execute a query against the default retention policy, it will then query across all retention policies to pull the data back into context. Again, it's one of the longest outstanding features that we've had from our sales team's perspective, and I've been here almost 4 years now, and we're super excited to lean in on this. We've got some great feedback from customers based on what they're already doing from a roll-up perspective, and if you have some additional inputs that you'd like to share with us, again, we're happy to have you join us in the community and share that with us. And sorry about the gardener who has decided to show up during my talk. Next up, so what else is missing? That's really the question that we get, is of all the investments that we've made in 2.0, and if we're delivering the value back to our enterprise customers in the form of Flux, certainly from a query engine perspective, and those read and write compatible APIs, one of the big things that's missing, obviously, is using Flux for tasks. So being able to schedule a task and run it. And obviously, for those of you that are using the tick stack and in particular leaned into capacitor, and there's more than 55,000+ of you out there, our goal is to allow you to run capacitor in a similar fashion that we've run InfluxDB with a side-by-side task engine that supports Flux. So effectively, you will have the ability to write and continue to use tick scripts, but we'll expose the 2.0 task API to interact with the Flux task engine, deploy tasks, schedule them, etc. Now, while there's no auto conversion of tick scripts to Flux, this will provide you with a smoother path again, and the power and the capabilities of a single language across both query and task. And after that, obviously, the remaining things that are missing are related to UI elements. Many of you are using Chronograph or Grafana already. So I know having a native UI may not be that interesting to you, but the idea is to continue to narrow the gap between what our enterprise users need and want, and continue to advance in terms of features and capabilities. And again, the timeline for this is the end of Q1 of 2021. Now, of course, capacitor is not static either. We're continuing to release some defect fixes and other minor enhancements, like advancing the event handlers that are available. In particular, we are working on ServiceNow. We've done a first pass of that, and we've already gotten some great feedback about how to advance that. We also have Big Panda in the queue, and most recently, capacitors learned how to use the enterprise LDAP users, and that should be available once InfluxDB Enterprise 1.84 drops the next maintenance release, which is due here before the end of the year. All right, so going beyond enterprise, and I think the other thing that's clear about or become clear based on Paul's talk yesterday is packaging up all the features and capabilities that we've delivered in cloud and offering that to an enterprise customer for high availability, horizontal scale out, and so on and so forth was going to be a big challenge. And I think the introduction of IOX actually makes that problem go away. From a packaging and distribution perspective, you can run it on bare metal, you'll be able to run it on Kubernetes backplane. And I think that's the thing we've been waiting for to ensure that we can get all these capabilities prepared and ready for you. So now looking beyond that, as we move forward on data acquisition, obviously Telegraf continues to be our most popular open source project, as Evan mentioned in his initial opening. But one of the things that folks have asked us for related to cloud and acquiring their data is a self-service capability to allow object store locations within their cloud service provider, CSP accounts. And what this means is, hey, if I'm currently using Influx and I want to hand you a ton of data, how can I hand it to you and then bulk import it, effectively trying to trickle feed it in, as opposed to trying to use the front door API to jam as much data in there as possible. And the formats that we'll start looking at obviously are line protocol, and obviously we have some support through the command line for CSV. Ideally, we'd also allow you to drop an entire TSM file in there. And obviously, as we go forward, Paul mentioned Parquet as a file format that we should also support. And that makes a ton of sense in terms of both import and obviously self-service backup and export. And so that's the second part of the story is similarly use an object store location, configure that within your InfluxDB cloud account, wire that up for obviously write access for us, and then schedule backups, selected backups. Now we know many of you have the need for holding on to an on-premise backup for compliance reasons. As Ryan mentioned yesterday, we're going through our own SOC 2 Type 2 audit, so we certainly understand the reasons for that. And so allowing you to set that up so that you can do a self-service as opposed to contacting our support team is obviously a super desirable outcome. And so that's something we're working on right now. So again, from a data acquisition perspective, Telegraf continues to advance. We are on a very regular schedule with Telegraf in terms of quarterly feature-bearing releases. and interim maintenance releases. A Telegraf team works hard within the community. A ton of the advancement in terms of features and capabilities come directly from our community members, again, which we're super appreciative of. It gives us very clear signal on who's using what and what's important. One of the things that's, if you attended the Telegraf training earlier in the week, you probably saw the ability for you to edit the Telegraf configuration within the InfluxDB Cloud UI. So that's one small improvement that's being made so that you can do that directly in the UI. So currently you can use the templates capability, import that configuration, and then make direct edits to it if you need to. But one of the things that we're hearing with folks that maybe aren't so familiar with the tech stack or just getting started with us when they dive into InfluxDB Cloud is, why do I need an agent to be distributed in order to get my data into my cloud instance? And so effectively what we're hearing is that folks are after a cloud native experience. How can I configure something within InfluxDB Cloud that can acquire my data directly into my instance? And so with that, the idea is that we will focus on that ability for you to configure that with a messaging service of your choice. And so if you're in Azure, you're probably using something like Event Hub, and Google, it's PubSub, and AWS's Kinesis is the popular messaging subsystem. And so if you can get your data to that point, then we'll configure that to allow direct ingest based on supported formats to specific buckets that you define. And so that's a second investment that we're making to simplify the data acquisition elements within cloud. Next, Ryan sort of laid out a lot of the features and capabilities that we've added since launching InfluxDB Cloud. And what I wanted to share a little bit about is what we've learned in our first year of operating cloud. And really one of the things we learned is that there are teams of you out there building and applications on top of the platform. You know, it's easy to get kind of roped into the idea that a single developer works on their own, you know, builds a cool application, and then the team gets built up around it. But one of the things we've really come to understand and appreciate is that there are teams, sometimes smaller teams, sometimes larger, that are working on these applications, and their need is to share and collaborate. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and how we're going to assist with that collaboration and sharing going forward. Second is obviously we've got a ton of developers out there who've poured in not only to the open source and the enterprise editions, but also to cloud, and are building net new applications. Many of those in the last year have been focused on the IoT space, as many of those working in IoT have to build bespoke applications to address their unique needs. And then last is, once you've built that application, what's the ops experience? If we're taking over some of that from a you know, cloud infrastructure perspective, there's still operational concerns or issues that may come up. And so providing better visibility into troubleshooting and understanding what's actually happening with the platform is a value and is being requested by many of you. So let's take each of those in turn. So the first thing in terms of teams is we introduced the UI-based consumption mechanism for InfluxDB templates. And if you haven't checked out InfluxDB templates, there's a link here on the slide that you can dive into. It's our GitHub repo where all those templates have landed. And I think we're up to 43 or so of those that are available, many contributed by community members, and then some obviously by Influxers and our Influx Aces. This is the mechanism for you to share your expertise with others in the community. If you've actually built something, a set of resources on top of InfluxDB, whether it's open source or cloud, that include the data acquisition configurations, dashboards, tasks, and other things, you can build, export, and share that template with others. This is also a mechanism that can be used for repeated deployment and changes for tasks. So if you have a set of tasks that you would like to you know, land, deploy, maybe you build them in the open source environment, and then you want to deploy them in your production cloud environment, you can use a GitOps style workflow to extract those, check them into GitHub, and obviously publish them on to your cloud environment. And so we've got a number of videos and some documentation that describes how to do that using an underlying capability of templates called stacks. But the idea obviously is once you've built that, you can either drive it through the API, command line facilities, or now the UI. And the UI walkthrough essentially tells you what kinds of resources are included in that template, and then installs it and then shows you the results of that installation. Again, intended to help teams share their expertise both within and across the various communities that you work in. And the templates really cover everything from networks and infrastructure software. And there's some gaming templates out there if you want to just play around with it for CSGO, Apex Legends, and Fortnite, of course. But yeah, definitely check those out. And if you build something cool that you want to share with others, drop it into the templates repo. And I know Michael Hall, our community manager, will be is continuing to curate those and provide feedback. So the other thing about what we're hearing from a sharing perspective, and this is a phrase you hear a lot at Influx. We used this yesterday. Actually, I was working on something. Teamwork makes the dream work. And one of the things that we're looking at is taking inspiration from some data science tooling out there. If any of you have used Jupyter Notebooks or Apache Zeppelin, this idea of how do you share and show your work from stage to stage, and working with time series data is a lot like that. And while I love the experience of our Data Explorer today and its ability for you to take a single query and publish it to a dashboard cell or turn it into the starting point for a task, or potentially even build a variable that can be used in your dashboards, sometimes the steps to get there are manyfold, meaning, I want to create an initial query. I then want to visualize its results. I may want to take another step and sort of build that experience up over a whole series of stages. And so this is what we're also hearing from many of you in terms of, I want to be able to show my team members how I got to the answer so that they can go back through my work and understand those steps and potentially either validate them or clone them for other types of analyses that they want to perform. We're also hearing that that process of exploration and data exploration may also then result in your desire to generate code using one of the many client libraries that are out there as a starting point for building your application around. And so today, some of those, breaking those things down and offering those as steps is essentially what's missing from our user experience. And so we've created a channel in the community Slack channel called Notebooks. And for those of you who are interested in participating in user research, we would love to get your hand up and work with you on this particular feature and capability. We're eager to understand how we might make this experience better for everyone and layer this in to the future experience of InfluxDB. And then second, a very popular request is the ability to annotate dashboards. This is another technique and mechanism for sharing information and analysis that's been done by individual team members that they need to communicate with others. And given the fact that many of us are working from home now, you can't just lean over to the person at the desk next to you to mention, hey, this spike on this graph looks like X, Y, and Z. The aliens are now contacting us from afar, and we need to tune into this frequency to listen to them, for example. And so, adding this capability so that you can share this naturally across dashboards with people living and working in remote locations obviously has increased its value in the last 8 to 9 months. So look forward to that. We're working on that now. And again, we appreciate some of the participation that we've already gotten from folks on commenting on that particular feature in progress. Now, another thing, as we turn our focus to developers, we introduced something called the LSP, Language Server Protocol, as part of InfluxDB Cloud for sure. And we built some extended tooling, in particular for Visual Studio, which is a plugin to help you work with, build, and execute Flux queries. So it leverages the LSP to do things like auto-completion and syntax highlighting and a whole list of things that you see here. But that LSP is also available for other code editors that support that mechanism. So for example, if you use Vim, like I do, there's a mechanism for you configuring how to leverage the Flux LSP through the CLI. And again, any other code editors, and obviously this is a short list that we're providing here that can support LSP mechanics and mechanisms, you can configure to use that. And so follow the instructions that we've got there as inspiration. And we'd love to hear what other editors that you're using that can leverage that. We can provide that information out more broadly to other community members. And then from a client library perspective, these 10 client libraries are available for you to build applications on top of. Arduino and C++, obviously, or sorry, C#. We heard a request for C++ recently. And one of the things we're attempting to do next is build a reference application. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We've also gotten requests for a Swift library and Flutter and Dart. And so those are in progress. And so again, as you have languages that you're either working with or don't see here, we'd love to get your feedback. And particularly if you'd like to see a better integration, Neil, we're happy to work with you on the specifics. So let us know. Specific feedback matters. Obviously, when you're digging into the client libraries, we're trying to bring more of the documentation and examples directly into the product. So the experience isn't you going in and having to jump back out to another code repo or some other source. So when you click on any of those specific tiles, it'll bring up the mechanisms for how you can install, initializing the clients, and then execute various code snippets. So again, as you lean into those and have feedback, again, we'll be happy to work with you on continuing to bring that information into context. And so with so many people building applications on top of the platform, I took a little bit of inspiration from last century. So for those of you who worked with the Java app servers and the J2EE environment, they had a canonical reference application called the Pet Store. Well, nothing in time series could be farther from a pet store. So the idea was to build something called IoT Center to capture the common use cases for people working with various devices. So how does the device register? How does the device get a token? How does the device send data? And so there's a portion of the application, obviously, that's dedicated to deploying on individual devices and tapping into all those APIs. And then second, the central application itself, how does it then communicate with the APIs to layer on top of InfluxDB and then expose those mechanisms to the devices to sort of complete the circuit. And so this is actually being built in Node.js and it's this first implementation, and I believe Anais is going to work on one based on Python. And if there are others that want to look at the canonical use cases and contribute reference implementations based on that, obviously we'd be open to doing that from a community perspective. But the idea is all these sorts of use cases will be documented and in the actual experience of IoT Center itself, on the left-hand side, you'll see the application and its capabilities depending on what page you're on. And on the right-hand side, there's a markdown file that will describe how to invoke the various APIs that are being used on that particular page so that you can explore it interactively as you walk through the app. And it's available as a Docker container, as well as if you want to build it and run it yourselves. And we'll be providing more documentation and visibility into that application as we go. And then on top of that, we have a specific developer's guide that will be built in the documentation set to highlight exactly how to break down all those application components and working with the APIs. And effectively, we're trying to provide more and better guidance for those of you who are building custom applications on the platform. And again, if you've got folks who are sort of eager to participate and contribute in this area, we'd love to get your feedback on even initial drafts of this. Again, reach us in the Slack channel or the community website, and we will get engaged. Now, next for developers, one of the things that we introduced, obviously, is this notion of tasks. If you come from the TickStack 1.x, you're using InfluxQL for query, TickScript for tasks, and the idea was to unify those languages around Flux. So you can use Flux for both interactive query and the task subsystem. And the initial introduction of the task subsystem essentially is define a Flux query and then schedule it using cron or the cron format or the various scheduling mechanisms to define how frequently you want that task to run. And now that we've been running this for quite some time, we're getting lots of interesting feedback about where to take the task system from here. So to talk through this a little bit, the idea is we would like to introduce the concept, we'd like to evolve the task system from just being a sort of a scheduled task to defining something called a named function. So you would define a named function in Flux. And obviously we still need to support the mechanism to execute these on a regular basis. But what we'd also like to do is focus on reusable code snippets and parameterization of those Flux queries themselves. The parameterization will actually drive the reuse, and instead of invoking, a static Flux instance, you can inject, variables and other kinds of parameters into the query, into the task. Secondly, providing for remote invocation, so not just based on a schedule. So if there's a particular event that you see, you can then invoke that named function directly. That leads to a similar kind of look and feel as a webhook. So if you want a particular action or activity to take place, that named function through a remote invocation is super similar to the way that webhooks work in other platforms. But last but not least, part of the evolution is that a direct invocation and a direct scheduling mechanism, while possible, leaves out one other part of the story, which is we'd like to be able to trigger these named functions based on specific events that arrive. And in particular, one of the events that we'll start with is based on late arriving data. So if our storage tier detects that data has arrived past a particular point in time that you can obviously define, then it can trigger a named function. Now, this is particularly valuable in cases where you're doing downsampling, you have late arriving data, then obviously we want to reevaluate and reassess that data. And so having an ability to trigger named functions based on specific events, starting with this sort of late arriving data concept and others, will be vastly more valuable to developers as they're building on top of the platform. So look forward to that as we continue to evolve the task system forward. Now, those of you that have built applications on the platform itself, one of the things you've asked for is, hey, I need more visibility into the health of my tasks that are running. Did a task fail? We've had situations where folks started out building a task. It was super reliable, ran every minute or two or three, and then all of a sudden their task stopped running for some reason. And in some cases, it was because the volume of data that they then ingested was, grew significantly, and they needed to rethink how that task was going to run and the amount of processing. Maybe it needed to run more frequently. But getting that visibility into the health of their tasks is a critical item. Second is within the cloud environment, obviously there are operational limits, some for the free tier, and then others on the paid tier. Those limits, some of those limits are obviously arbitrary boundaries that we put in place, and you can request limit increases. So for example, the default series cardinality limit on a production pay-as-you-go cloud account is 1 million series today. That's an arbitrary number that we chose to put in place as the initial ceiling. But just like you can request limit increases for resources within EC2, you can also request a cardinality increase within InfluxDB Cloud. The problem is if you don't have great visibility into where you are from a series cardinality perspective, or where that cardinality is coming from, you're probably not looking ahead as to when you might need that limit increase. And of course, if you do hit the limit, then no new series can be written. And so that's an undesirable outcome. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is providing better visibility into cardinality as a starting point and a drill down into where that cardinality is growing. This is super similar to the Enterprise 1.9 kinds of features, operational visibility features that we talked about. And then next up, we'll look at also the write limits as well and seeing where you are from that perspective. But again, it's another part of it, sort of administering the app, running on the platform is seeing where you are in terms of the thresholds and providing clear signals back out as you're approaching some boundary conditions. And then similar to that request that we get for SOC compliance and other things, an activity feed. So how can we show you what's happening in terms of your cloud account, in terms of who's accessing it and when, what changes they're making, and more. And so that's another sort of insight, a little bit related to teams as well. So you have team members coming in and making changes. You'd like to see what they touched and when, if that's a signal to you to go in and sort of review, particularly as we get the notebooking feature implemented. If you want to look at, seeing the work of others and what that meant, seeing what notebooks they touched obviously is a great clue, particularly in this sort of distributed environment that we're working in. So those are a bunch of operational improvements that we're looking for those building those custom apps on the platform. So now returning, we started off the talk talking about open source and its general availability. And I want to close with talking a little bit about what's next for open source. We've actually reached this point of essentially largely parity between what the open source is capable of doing from a feature function perspective and what's available in InfluxDB Cloud. But that point of parity obviously is quite different in terms of the serverless capabilities and scale out that you have on the cloud environment versus running a single node. But this point of feature parity is actually sort of the end, if you will, from a certain perspective, which is now that we've got open source at a GA state, it's time to start looking at the benefits of diverging some of the capabilities that are available in open source and how the open source instance can connect with and complement the capabilities in InfluxDB Cloud. And so let me share with you a couple of example deployments that we see in the world. Now, some of these are actually derived from what folks are doing with 1.x tick stack, but all of this had to be sort of assembled and architected on their own. Very few specific product features are here to support these kinds of things. So let's start with the first one, which is, you obviously have sensors, devices, and software, various stacks and other things that you're monitoring with Telegraf. So you have a single Telegraf instance or tapping into all of those, various things. And then, Telegraf sends its data to a single instance of InfluxDB open source. And, depending on how many local environments you have, this could be on board a ferry, it could be on an oil rig, it could be in some other far-flung area. And each one of those local environments obviously is capturing all of that data and providing local command, control, and visibility over that data through the local InfluxDB instance. And typically what we see then is there is a central, whether it's enterprise or cloud instance of Influx that's running, that's serving a different audience. And that different audience tends to be the folks back at corporate headquarters. They don't necessarily need the direct command and control. Obviously, they're not on the ferry, they're not on the oil rig, but they're doing different things with the data. And in particular, what they're doing are things like machine learning activities, trying to do predictive maintenance schedules that then they may communicate back to the operator that's working within that environment, or scheduling maintenance for downtime, for example, if it's a ship. That can all be done centrally. And obviously they need access and visibility to the data at some level of granularity, typically not as fine-grained as within the local environment, but each of those environments may send some sort of unique signal back to the mothership. And the idea behind this, of course, is that looking at the variety of the data centrally provides them with an insight about what's the same and what's different from an operational perspective across all those environments. And that can only be done centrally by gathering data from all of those distributed instances. Now, in this case, we have Telegraf doing a dual write where obviously it's writing to the local instance, and then a second output plugin is configured. There may be some local aggregation that's done within Telegraf, or some other potentially using the Starlark plugin that Ryan mentioned yesterday to shape the data differently before it's sent off to the central instance. In other deployment example is you may have Telegraf or client library sort of resident in individual locations, so individual sensors or individual devices. And then before the data is pushed to a distributed location, it goes through what we call interstitial telegraph layer, or a separate tier of telegraph. And then that's pushed on to the cloud or the central environment. So these things are easily supported and configurable today, supported by the way that the product features and capabilities work. But obviously, there are other types of setups and configurations that folks desire. And in particular, the one that we hear about is what I'd like to be able to do is very similar in my local environment on the left side to this right side, but I want to do a post ingestion sending of the data from the local Influx instance to cloud. And so how do I do that? How do I connect the edge to the cloud? I may do the downsampling with InfluxDB. I may make a whole series of other changes, but this is the use case. All of these use cases, we'd like to improve the features and capabilities of both Telegraf and InfluxDB to provide greater visibility to what's connected to the instance, be it local or remote, and support more of a first-class configuration experience to allow for changes to be published and distributed, obviously from the central environment to those local environments. And so in order to do that, a single pane of glass for observability and administration, and then figuring out the specific mechanics of the time series data integration, metadata integration, and then other data transformations. And obviously in some of these cases, the reliability of the connection from the local to the central environment can be a challenge. We've definitely seen people use technologies like Apache NiFi to connect local and distributed environments. And that's certainly a solution that, again, you can architect on your own today. NiFi does support both InfluxDB 1 and 2 from a processor's perspective. But obviously, we'd like an all-influx sort of native solution that addresses all of these challenges and supported by specific product features and functions. And so really, the idea here is connecting the edge, whether the edge is, in this case, we'll start with open source, with features that land in the open source and cloud to connect these two things. So one is your open source instance. You could set it up and say, I want to register my open source instance with the cloud. And when it does that, then central changes using that template and stacks mechanism that we discussed could be staged to then be pulled by that open source instance when it reconnects. The open source instance can do things like report back. Yep, I received that package. I've deployed it. It appears to be running. I'm staying there. Or I received that package. It failed. I'm rolling back to my last known good configuration, and you need to try again. Central folks, to push another update. And then also the idea is to make those connected edges completely observable, right? Layering in controls for that change management. When was the last time it reported? How many data points did it report in? Summary statistics, so that you can get visibility over the health and availability of those different services. And then also extending that, not just between open source and cloud, but extending it to Telegraf. Like we're in the midst of just defining what's going to make up the qualities of Telegraf 2.0. Obviously, Telegraf, I think we're up to Telegraf 116. And, what is it that is a change, a significant change that will take Telegraf to the next level? And I think one of the things is, one of the challenges we run into is that Telegraf instances can be far flung. I think we talked yesterday about, sort of 10,000 Telegraf agents being distributed across a data center or more. What kinds of unique identifiers could we use to understand who's reporting in and when? How can you group those into logical groupings so that you can deal with them as a set? So like if I'm doing server monitoring, for example, and I know I have a Ubuntu property that I'm managing, I'd like to define those and manage those as a group. Maybe I'm monitoring a set of servers that are running, SQL Server or Postgres or something else on top. Again, I'd like to deal with those as a group, but like the same kinds of metrics and visibility into those. And so combination of layering in qualities around Telegraf so that it can be managed as a group of things, that it provides some uniqueness into the individual reporting. This is super handy in terms of troubleshooting. I know we've had instances where a deployment of a Telegraf agent started sending in, based on a misconfiguration, started sending in a ton of metrics. And so, being able to identify which one, quarantine it, shut it down, so that that investigation and triage can go on without stopping all the other Telegraf agents could be super, super powerful in terms of its capabilities. Also, again, if you took the Telegraf training on Monday, you're seeing sort of the path for expanding and simplifying our configuration and editing capabilities of the Telegraf configurations. Again, leveraging some of these GitOps style stacks and template deployment mechanisms that we've already put in place as the foundation. We're also working diligently with a group of students at Berkeley, in University of Berkeley here, University of California, Berkeley, on a Telegraf configuration assistant that allows you to interactively change the Telegraf configurations through the command line. It actually advertises which plugins are available and allow you to more dynamically configure Telegraf on the fly. And so obviously laying the groundwork for that allows us to do a lot more configuration activity centrally and stage those things for Telegraf to pull. And then working on the specific signaling mechanism so that can happen is one of the next steps. Again, those qualities that'll make up Telegraf 2.0 is what we're focused on. And obviously the result would be that we can make that ingestion completely observable and layer in additional controls based on the behavior of those Telegraf agents. So that's it. InfluxDB open source is now generally available 2.0. Come and grab those Linux-based images. If you're using 1.x today, it's an in-place upgrade. Definitely explore those features and capabilities. Build and share your templates. Sharing expertise is what makes the community powerful. We deeply appreciate all of the insights and the information that you share back with us about how we can make the platform itself better. But I also think there's an opportunity for you to share amongst yourselves things that, obviously are not proprietary within your particular business environments, but help each other stand on the shoulders of giants. If you're an expert in a particular technology and you've built a cool, way to monitor that, share it with others. I know I'm in the midst of trying to extract my my GPU monitoring template that I've been using to monitor my son's gaming activity during the pandemic. So I need to share that out with others so that you can tap in and see what your kids are up to on their machines as well. And then last but not least, this is a call for me for user recruitment. If you're working within a team and you want to discuss with us the notebooks capability further, you have other ideas about how to make teamwork better in terms of working on the platform, we'd love to hear with you. We'd love to engage. Find us in the Slack channel, the notebooks channel. Developer feedback as well as we roll out the reference app and the developer's guide. Definitely let us know. And then if you have other operational suggestions or improvements, these are the areas we're focused on, and we love to engage with you, hear your thoughts, understand your use cases better, and that makes the platform grow. So with that, I'm going to dive into a few questions that have landed. So Daniel Garcia asked, hey, the intelligent rollups sound really cool. Is there anything similar for Cloud 2? Well, this is a case where we're going to experiment with this on the enterprise release first, Daniel. Initially it may be a very simplistic, just grab the mean, for example, of the different metric values as a starting point, and then we'll expand from there. Definitely seen way more sophisticated rollup metrics, everything from min, mean, max, counts and sums to percentiles at 90th and 95th and 99th percentile being calculated and all being stored as a rollup. But I think we're going to start by introducing that with the enterprise release first, and then we'll look to see how we introduce that into cloud. Michael, I'm going to butcher your last name, so I'll skip it, asked when the new features of InfluxDB will be available. As I remember, target date, as I mentioned, target date is end of Q1 of 2021, and it'll be part of a feature-bearing release. So 1.9 is the next feature-bearing release, just sequentially. That is the plan. Daniel also asked, object stores including Azure Blob Storage. Yeah, whatever the, I mean, we tend to say S3 as a, underlying object store, but the equivalent object store in the cloud service provider of choice will be the way to do bulk data ingest and support that backup functionality. Essentially, you can think of it as whatever your object storage technology within those different environments, you would expose the ability for us to read from one of your buckets and then write to one of your buckets. And then that would support the ingest and the backup capabilities. And obviously we'll need some sort of status page to let you know the process of and progression of processing those files. Did we run into errors? Was it successful? Did we halt the processing for some reason, particularly on, error count, those sorts of things that you may want to type in and take a look at. But there'll need to be some sort of audit trail about and summary stats on processing of those things. And so both the configuration page and then supporting visibility into the operational aspects of that will be made available. And then Neil Horlock, yep, dive in with us on improvements for VS Code. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what's working, not working. And yeah, the notebooks we're super excited about as well. And then also from Neil, is there a channel to discuss language libraries and interfaces generically for the ones that are not currently supported? We can certainly create such a thing, maybe just dropping that in general. I know that there is a Python channel and specifically for the Python folks, but if you don't see a library like we heard about Swift, I mean, even just dropping that in the general channel to start with so we can pick up the conversation would be a great way to go. Anything else, Emily, out there, question-wise?
Did you even take a breath during that whole session?
I thought breathing wasn't allowed, Chris. Trained me well.
It looks like there's another question. Can you please share some insights on threshold feature? I thought you mentioned it earlier.
So currently we do support threshold-based alerts. Let's take a step back. So we built the task system, which is based on a schedule. And then what we did through the user interface is we actually built a capability called checks and notifications. It leverages the underlying task subsystem to do its work. Currently, we're supporting both the threshold-based checks and deadman alerts, deadman check, essentially, like has the thing reported in within a specific time frame. I would say it's been a mixed set of feedback based on the work that's been done so far. What's happened is if you have a very simple check that you want to define, it's working great. But as soon as you go beyond that, if you have certain kinds of regular expression you want to apply or a more custom query, then the definition of the initial check is essentially not going to work for you from the user experience perspective. And so there's documentation out there that will help you define custom checks as opposed to going through the user experience. But this is another area for user recruitment that we would love to get feedback on because we're in the midst of looking at how we improve that experience overall, and the threshold-based checks is really the first area that we're diving in on and focusing on. So yeah, Subramanian, if you want to reach out to us in Slack, and if you have some feedback or if you have questions, we can definitely dig in with you more there. Improve Microsoft Teams integration, anonymous attendee. Ooh, that's very mysterious. They may work at Microsoft. I mean, we did introduce support for Teams, both in Capacitor and Influx. So you should be able to leverage Teams to send alert notifications out. So if you have something specific that you're looking for that it doesn't currently do, yeah, we're happy to take that feedback and evolve it. So let us know. I think that was in Ryan's slide yesterday. Microsoft Teams would show up there.
Wow, that was a lot, Tim, and a lot of great questions. And if anybody has any other questions for Tim, he's still going to be here, so hit him up in the Slack channel. And he's actually in the Slack and the community forum quite a bit. And we will be doing a follow-up session with him in a month because I'm sure between now and then there'll be lots of additions to the 2.0 project, and he'll be there to share that with you.
And Enterprise 1.9 too, Chris.
And Enterprise 1.9, yeah, there we go, to make Michael happy. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Tim. And just a reminder to our audience, we will make sure that this recording is posted, and we'll let you guys know. There was a lot that he covered in here, so I'm sure, I know I'm going to have to listen to it again. So we'll make sure that we send the information of when this goes live as soon as possible. Thank you so much, Tim.